everybody. Can you hear? Yes. Can you hear me at the back? I'm Fiona Laird. I'm a theatre director and a charity founder, and this is Tim Smit, the co-founder of the Eden Project and other things, which we're going to talk about. So, the title of this chat is Tourism, Culture and Regeneration. Start.
Shall I talk about something completely random?
Yeah, fix it up.
One of the really interesting things is that culture seems to be seen as a luxury, when in fact it is the cultural glue that makes society what it is and gives them a sense of belonging. And if I may, I'll talk about two examples where I've seen culture completely change a city. I mean, completely change it. The first is in the northern French city of Nantes, on the River Loire. Nantes, as you know, was a big shipbuilding place, built submarines and everything. About 20 years ago, it was amongst the most depressed cities in the whole of France. It had huge problems with drug abuse, violence. It had a university that was the university where only if you couldn't get in somewhere else would you go there. And this amazing chap turned up called Jacques Soignon. And let me tell you about Jacques. He had a moustache that went out to him. Soignon, he went out like this. And he liked the young people. So he was given the job of being the horticultural director of the city of Nantes. And he said, I will make this an important job. He proceeded to do astonishing things. What an astonishing thing. On day one of his job, to put an advertisement in a local Nantes newspaper that he wanted to find all of the talented young men and women who were spray painting all the shops and public buildings in the middle of Nantes, because they so obviously had a talent and he needed their help. Could they turn up at the Botanic Garden? So all these lads and lasses turned up, and he said, look, I would really like you to just really spray paint your anger at the world and how you see it going all over the French equivalent of Victorian era buildings. I've only got one request. Could you please do it in water-based painting so that we can keep what... No, he was very tactful. So we keep what we like, but what we don't like we start again, a bit like an etch-a-sketch. It's just utterly brilliant. So they go a long weekend of spray painting, and press of France, they think this guy is mad, and they come and take photographs. So suddenly, literally on his day one in his job, week one, he's already a name. The madman who got youth to spray paint the Botanic Garden. He then decided that Nantes was a beautiful city, he said. It's a very beautiful city, but no one has time to sit and enjoy Nantes. Let us make chairs. Made chairs, they placed all over Nantes. Some of them were like this, so you slid down onto the floor. Others were for kids, like this big. Others were 6 foot high and had seats that you needed to climb up. Before you knew it, Nantes was being known as a bit of a wacky place. It came to the autumn, which, as all of you know, is the time when in the French cities they pollard their plane trees, you know, to make sure that their trees just grow like that. And he said, this year we're not going to compost or burn our trees, we're going to gather them into bunches, and we're going to put them and tie them to all the bridges in Nantes. And then we will get our friends, the spray painters, and they will come and spray paint the top of all of these branches red and orange. And he then summoned the national press. The bridges of Nantes are on fire. And the pictures were sensational. Then the next thing that happened was a guy called François Labillière. He came, he had a company, a theatre company called La Machine, which all of you will have heard of but may not remember. The guy who builds the big elephants and the dragons that breathe fire and whatever. There's a whole bunch of companies that came out of his original company, and they took over the U-boat pens in the middle of Nantes and made it a workshop. But it was a workshop that was open for the public and young people to see what genius engineers could construct. The first thing they constructed was a fire-breathing dragon, and then they decided to have a fire-breathing giant dragon fight an elephant in the middle of Nantes. the world's press was transfixed. Another theatre company moved to Nantes. The university in Nantes, we're now only 18 months in, suddenly he's getting a whole load of people who want to come to university in Nantes. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
Suddenly restaurants open all down the River Loire are going away from the U-boat pens on both sides. Public art starts springing up. Great artists come because it's got this culture. Today, the University of Nantes is one of the most difficult universities in the whole of France to get into.
Where's Monsieur Soignot?
Monsieur Soignot, at this particular moment, is probably having an aperitif.
Is he still in Nantes?
He is still in Nantes, and he came and we asked him whether he would come and speak to our conference at Eden last November called Anthropy about regeneration. And he spoke with the most brilliant Poirot accent.
Poirot's Belgian.
Yes, but he's Wallon Belgian. Yes, so he speaks the French. So anyway, he talked, and it was like watching a whole bunch of cobras coming out of the whole audience was just like this as he spoke. It was like everybody was collectively a cat being stroked. But the point is, 20 years ago, there were 0 tourists going to Nantes. 0 tourists. Today, 2.3 million people a year come to Nantes to enjoy Nantes. There are hundreds of hotels and restaurants. The education system is transformed because they are suddenly in the middle of something rather than peripheral. So I think it's really important to understand cultural regeneration is about, it's like Bill Shankly used to say about football, it's more important than life. But culture is actually, so that the people of Nantes now see themselves as being in a cultural heartland. And Nantes is also, just south of Nantes, you've got Flamanville, where La Machine did the greatest act of restoration in civic history. You must know about this. The secret hoard of the archaeologist to Napoleon that was supposed to have died at the Battle of the Nile, Nelson. But no, he had survived. He survived. And he'd hidden the treasures that he'd stolen from the pyramids in Flamanville. And they were now going to have to hunt for them. And anyway, I won't bore you with the details, but it is fantastic the way that this whole thing about the culture. Flamanville had this huge square, every shop was closed. Today, it is a hive of industry. As the whole of Flamanville started to hunt for these treasures and to your business, theatre. It's fantastic. The other place I was going to mention, but I've talked too long.
No, it's fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hobart.
Tasmania.
Yeah. Up until about 6 or 7 years ago, Hobart was Hobart. Hobart was Britain in about 1947. You went to Hobart to die, or because you didn't have the imagination to go somewhere else. Seriously. And this guy goes back to Hobart. He was born there, a single parent mother, a guy called David Walsh. He has Asperger's. He very rarely can get through a sentence without calling you all sorts of bad words, but they're signs of affection. And he wanted to get his revenge on the town that had made his mum feel bad. And he made hundreds of millions of pounds gambling. He's one of the greatest gamblers in the world. He regards anybody who thinks he's a gambler as an absolute fool. He says it's a business, but I know what I'm doing. But he makes hundreds of horses. He always says, gambling on horses without knowing the meaning of the horse race is a fool's game. If you understand why the horse is racing in that race, you can then 9 times out of 10 pick the winner. By which he means that only very few races all over the world are all the horses trying to win. Because, so in fact, the only races you want to bet on are the horse races where every horse in it wants to win. And if you know that every horse wants to win, it's very easy to judge who will win.
Yeah, because a lot of times trainers just put a horse out to have a run or to shoot it doesn't exist, whether it can be this distance. That's very important.
So, he's made hundreds of millions. He's now going to shock Hobart, and he builds a gallery called Mona, the Museum of Old and New Art, which is, even Charles Samara Smith says it's the best art gallery in the world, bar none. It is like if you were fantasizing, absolutely drunk, about what is your fantasy James Bond villain's place. This place exceeds it. Yeah, he's just drilled a hole through a sandstone bluff, and he goes into a cathedral space about half the size of York Minster, only a bit more glamorous. I'm sorry, God, you should have done better. It's when the lightning just strikes me, and you're left looking at a pair of bricks singeing. So it goes down several hundred feet into ground. You've got this cathedral-like polished sandstone atrium, and you're met by men and women who are impossibly handsome and beautiful, dressed in dinner attire. It doesn't matter whether it's night or what, offering you whiskey or vodka to drink before you go on your tour. And you go to the very first exhibit, which is a black table on which is a casket. My dad, may he rot in hell. It was his ashes. And then you go into this amazing gallery. And one of the first things if you've got to excuse me, because there's no other way of making this polite, right? The first exhibit is called 100 Cunts. And you see, it's shocking. I mean, I knew it would have that effect, but it is shocking. And he meant the people of Hobart to hate him. It backfired completely. The people of Hobart had never been so joyously shocked. And they came in their droves to this place, 400,000 people a year. No one had ever gone to Hobart, 400,000 people coming. But this gallery is bliss. It is amazing. They get the world's top artists to be in there. You've got old masters mixed to modern art. It's always thought-provoking. It's to say it's unpretentious, but what I mean by that is you can see there's a guy with a vision to make you think, to make you ask. Now you go into a really big room where you've got like a Marina Abramovich installation where you've got 100 people singing a peace song, but in their own language, but each one is in their language. And you're asked to sit in the deck chair, and if you're going to sit in the deck chair, you have to be there for the full 3 minutes. You can't get up and go. And it's really weird. I would have walked out, but I didn't have the chance because my mate just sat down. So I had to sit there. No, but it's really weird. I mean, what idiot sits doing that? But after 3 minutes, you're thinking, God, language. Wow, language is such a funny thing. I mean, they're all different words, but the rhythm, the pattern, the flow is astonishing. Now, the reason I'm telling you this story is they get the 400,000 visits a year to this museum, but the main curator holds two exhibitions. One is called a festival. One is called Dark Mofo, which takes place in our summer solstice, because the southern hemisphere do it. And then you do Light Mofo, which is on December solstice. And they get world famous people to come and perform in the middle of Hobart. And I think 7,000 people a day come over just to see what they're doing. Now, when I was there June before last, can you imagine bringing the 70 top chefs of Australia, if you can imagine 70 top chefs, coming to the middle of Hobart, and they are paired up randomly together to cook. And the whole place is just restaurants. And they create a new cuisine for a week. It is astonishing, absolutely astonishing.
So these visionary people, I mean, one thing that strikes me about all visionary people is at the beginning, there's always and then everyone thought they were mad, is always the beginning, and then somehow, with these people that you're talking about, they overcome that and create these great triumphs of regeneration and cultural brilliance. So how do we encourage everybody to tap into that visionary? Because it's fear that stops most people, isn't it, from having. Everybody has ideas.
Yeah.
But how do people get the cojones, and how do we?
It's a very sexist comment.
I'm using a generic term. If you were going to say to a group of, well, so these people who probably all have brilliant ideas, how to counter the fear of what stopped you? How did you get around fear? Did you have any? Well.
No, I've never had fear of it, because I've known since I was a child that I'm a bit odd. By which I mean, I've always lived a lot in my imagination, and I realised only recently, I'm 68 now, I realised only a few years ago that I'm genuinely odd. I'm a slow developer. Yeah. No. In as much as when I go to bed, I can start a dream off. Like kickstart it, like putting a bit of petrol in the carburetor to get the engine going. And then I go to sleep, and I can now steer my dreams.
Lucid dreaming.
Yeah. I didn't realise that not that many people do that. But they're all building dreams. Everything I do is a building dream. And I think one of the things that most people don't do is to realise that their dreams can be built. Therefore, they still reside in fantasy as opposed to getting upgraded to, right now my force is on it. Why can't we build an amazing, could we all build something amazing that the world's press wants to see, built out of bamboo, just down the road here? Of course we can. You're just going to make the right phone calls to the right people and get everybody to say, stop being modest. Nobody wants to work on the second best bamboo festival. No, it's really the best single decision, other than in my private life, I've ever made was at Eden when we were trying to build Eden, and we knew we could not raise the money quite to build 3 complete biomes. And I had a choice. Do we do the typical English thing of making them all a little bit smaller? Or do we just kill one? And I thought, who wants to come and see the second biggest conservatory in the world? Let's kill one. So we still built the biggest one. Great decision, because then they came and we made the money to be able to develop Eden from it being successful, whereas it wouldn't have been successful at the smallest one. We were talking about that this morning in terms of if you have like an assembly for Yorkshire, for example. There's a fantastic example of the guy who took over the subway in New York. He blew the whole budget for a year. He blew instantly on removing the graffiti. It was mad. Removing the graffiti and then starting a zero tolerance policy to crime in the subway. What happens is people then started to use the subway, and the money that they were now using, because they were no longer scared of the subway, enabled the budget to then match again. And it's that kind of creative thinking.
It's these leaps of faith
Yeah.
we've been talking about before. How do you create change? How does change happen? Somebody at some point has to take a leap, and if people hold hands together and take leaps of faith, then bigger change can happen. But just because we're interested in you, what are other moments in your life where you've reached pivotal points where you had to take leaps of faith that could have gone a different way?
I mean, other than get married, that sort of thing. All the time. And I work on the principle. Well, my life is quite chaotic in as much as I have a number of principles by which I lead it.
Yeah.
The most important thing is that I accept every third invitation.
That's a good
It doesn't mean I don't accept the first, but I always accept the third, unless it clashes with a domestic obligation. And the reason for that is that we are all very conservative with a small c, and we will always accept the invitation from a friend to go out, do whatever, or people in the professional area. But I've had to judge orchid shows, I've judged dog shows, I've opened old people's homes, I've been to the West of England Ballroom Dancing Championships. So much stuff. I've been to visit religious things for all sorts of stuff.
So that forces you to take risks.
And each time you meet people,
Yeah.
you see, if you're a bad parent, you tell your children to go to some posh school or university. Why? To meet the people you need to meet. This shows how stupid you are. Great history is not made by meeting the people you need to meet. It's made by meeting the people you didn't know you needed to meet. It's the complete lateral thing. Because marvellous stuff, well, you know this from theatre, marvellous stuff comes from putting together two things that shouldn't go together, and you suddenly go, oh, that's heaven.
Yeah, drama is conflict.
Yeah, it is. So, I have a lot of events like that. I do often willingly take risks on the grounds, how will I know if it wouldn't work if I don't go for it?
There's a great saying, which is the only way you can find out whether or not you can trust someone is to trust them.
Yes.
That's that principle, isn't it? The only way I can find out whether this is going to work or not is to do it. Yeah. Because just thinking about it, you won't get nothing happens.
No, and most people are like that, but they pretend they're not. If that wasn't the case, why do people fall in love, get disappointed, and fall in love again? No, I mean, I'm being serious. I don't mean to be funny, because I'm sure all of us in this room have had our disappointments from time to time, in my life, I've trusted a lot of people, and I have so rarely been let down. there's something about the act of trust that solicits the corresponding act of trust to you.
Do you think governments should trust people more?
Well, if I was not being jokey about it, yes, they should. I think we have had this chat privately about it. That one of the problems is us. We're a bunch of so-and-sos because we expect of those that put themselves up for public service that they should give us everything we ask for.
And don't ask for it.
Or don't ask for it, and it's like spoiled brats.
Yeah.
And correspondingly, politicians then lose the courage because they want the chance to at least prove that they can do a thing or two. So they say, well, if you want that, okay, I'll say I can do it, and then you get down and say, see what I can do, and then they inevitably get a bloody nose, don't they? And part of the problem is us, because we behave like consumers and not citizens.
Do you think people don't like being trusted?
I think that's actually a really good point. That's a really profound point, that if we're being trusted, then it shows how juvenile we are if we can't actually deliver.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's much better if they do it. They know.
Yeah.
And the problem is our
Responsibility.
yeah, you don't realise they died years ago. There is no they. That's the problem.
Yeah.
But that's why there's this profound fracture now in across Europe, and I don't know about America because I don't work there, but profound fracture in business, right? And the fracture is that many people in business are very moral, but they've always been able to assume and stretch the law to suit whatever it is they do. I don't mean poisoning the world, whatever, but they're suddenly realizing that there is no they. And government can't do this stuff. And actually the only people who can do it are going to be people who have authority in public service and in corporations. I find it absolutely riveting that what's going on. You'll see in business meetings, I don't know if I'm going to get shot for this, but let me tell you, there are a lot of very serious business people who are now no longer inviting people who are chairs and CEOs of certain businesses that we know that might be responsible for poisoning the water, mentioning no names or things like that. They're no longer welcome. And this is really interesting how this is now happening in society, in private things. What's going on? There's a whole bunch of people who are engaged in business. We want to create wealth. We want to look after our staff. We want to do all this stuff. Who do not want to be called with a business community anymore. They want to cut away these people who want to be part of the business community because they think that they're actually a moral force for bad. And that is a really encouraging thing. And COVID has actually in many ways been an inspiration for that, because so many men and women who run companies have had to deal with their kids saying, this is terrible, or mum, or whatever. And it's had a much more profound impact than I think any one of us would have dreamt of.
Well, we didn't. I mean, yes, we couldn't have. It was hard, wasn't it, at the beginning of the pandemic to foresee good coming out of it, because it just felt terrifying at the time. And I'm sure positive people probably had conversations and went, something good will come out of it, in the same way that great innovation often comes at times of war, because we need pressure on us often to get off our asses and create and think positively. If you're just left in a room with nothing, don't tend to create anything. You only create something if you have to. Really, whether it's a personal need to create. We could just riff for hours, but I suspect that people in the audience probably have questions for Tim. So,
Can I just interrupt you? The gig list here said you and I were in conversation. No, but what's happened is you have very, very elegantly asked me to yak, and we haven't talked about you and how you got to be here and why you're asking me the questions, because you've set up some very successful things.
I'm asking you the questions because they asked me to ask you the questions, and I said, call it in conversation. I said, why don't we call Fiona Laird interview Tim Smit? And they said, no, let's make it in conversation. But I do have an interest in culture and regeneration and tourism, because I am in theatre and I put on plays and people buy tickets to come and see the plays, and I think that art can change the world and does change the world and does change people. And I believe in trust and acts of faith, and often in rehearsal rooms, because actors are very scared. It's terrifying acting. And people think that actors, because they are voice trained and they're trained to not look nervous, they think they're confident. They're not. They're absolutely terrified all the time. And they're terrified of being laughed at. They're terrified of looking stupid. And often in rehearsal, I'll say to them, you have to try every idea you have, because you don't know if it's going to work unless you try it. And you'll never get to that final brilliant idea if you haven't had 8 really crap ones first. So you have to learn to go, that was an idea, I tried it, it didn't work, and I've learned from that we'll try this. Because if you just sit in a room thinking, I've got to wait for the perfect idea, you'll just end up sitting in the room. You have to try something and then fail and fail better or whatever. But I think we're in the same business of being proactive, being reactive by being proactive. I spend half my life saying to people, the world is not a rigid set of data that you have to navigate. It's constantly, second by second, evolving, and you have no control over the future. So everything you do is the future. I think most people go out into life thinking, as I say, rigid set of data that you have to go, I'm going to have a job and I want a house, I'm married, do this, and I just have to navigate these immovable objects and unstoppable forces. It's not like that at all. You can decide to change things, and just making that decision does change things. But that can be quite a lonely place sometimes, can't it? Because there is that sense of everybody's going to think I'm mad if, and the fear of getting it wrong and dealing with that fear is a big thing. And I think good politicians have it too, that they're trying to change the world, and nobody wants to be unpopular, but politicians are often very deeply unpopular, and that's not what they want. But not everybody likes everything. The change isn't always easy.
Do you think the only other job open to politicians, I know you're married to one, so probably an exception, but do you think the only other job is to be like a wrestler? You know, where actually, boo, and do all that sort of stuff. Sorry, I'm just being light-hearted about it. But
Yeah,
But they do.
they would.
They do. There's a lot of that in Parliament anyway, don't they?
well, boo.
Yes.
That stuff.
Yeah.
But it is taking risk and trying to change is always going to be the unsafe option. One of my maxims for life is do what you most fear. If you have 2 choices, do the one that's more frightening, because more interesting things can do.
That sounds to me the worst maxim I've ever. Okay, tomorrow I'm going to be diving with great white sharks. After that, I'm going to go naked to the top of the Eiffel Tower.
Well, isn't it, if you're given the option of, right, you can choose either to go naked to the top of the Eiffel
Or
Tower,
dive with white sharks. It's a lousy landing.
or go fully clothed to the top of the Eiffel Tower.
Both are actually scary.
Yeah, but
No.
most fear. No, but it's safe is for
No. Well, it's interesting.
cowards.
No, what is interesting when you look at CV, many of you and employed people from times, I'm sure, and when you get CVs, the CVs that you always distrust and have almost always disappointed me when I've made the decision to employ someone that has never made mistakes. It is really weird when you get that sort of thing, like, I went to Harvard and I went to Cambridge and I did this and I did that. Everything's absolutely excellent, and then they worked in a mental home and they were good to their granny, and they did all of the things. You should have felt alarm bells. You should, because there is something you're going to get hurt.
But how can you list your failures on your CV? But these mistakes I've made, mistakes of which I'm most proud.
No, I'm talking about how the CV translates into the interview. Because you fall for it first time, you say, well, this person's got to be included, so you talk to them. And they're just exquisitely calm and smooth, and you know they're psychopaths. You just know it. Where is the flaw? And even if there's nothing wrong with you, I hate you already. How can you be so perfect?
What techniques did you develop to get through then when you were interviewing?
I talk about Mexican food. because anybody that I employ who really genuinely likes Mexican food, I know I won't get on with them. So, and also the people who are also, this could be actually criminal what I'm saying, couldn't it? I'm going to get all sorts of lawsuits against the people that I interviewed over the years who didn't like Mexican food. Oh God, there's going to be a class action. No, joking apart, it is really important to talk to people long enough. If you're employing people for, if we're being serious, the biggest mistakes in my life professionally have been not spending enough time really getting to know someone before I offer them a job. Because ultimately, people who have reached a certain status have got all the smoothies. They know how to say the things that you like. You know what I mean? And they probably read up on you in such a way so they know what your weak spots are. So my particular hobby is marine archaeology. You as well. I couldn't do it. It's a thing, you know, anthropology, my favourite subject. And you've got to get to the point where you tease someone into a position where they're expressing who they are rather than who you want them to be. And I'm thinking of two particular great failures of mine, which I regret to this day. And I can also think of some great successes with people who on paper shouldn't have got the job, who the more I spoke to them, the more I realised they had that kind of ingredient X, which all of us would recognise. I've got a feeling that person will have my back. Do you know what I mean? That feeling, someone who what they say to you is going to be true, and that actually it's late at night and your organisation needs to do something. They don't look at their watches. I'm here. You know what I mean? And those are the people in life you really want around you. They're the magic people. And qualifications sometimes mask so much. So we've become, at Eden, being serious about it, we've become much more relaxed about what your background's got to have been, and much, except if you're an accountant, it helps if you're an accountant. Okay, so any of you who are accountancy people that don't have any qualifications, don't speak to me. Sometimes wish mine did. No, I didn't say. No, but joking apart, you sometimes meet people who are just magic people who've been waiting all their life for that job that you've got. And when you talk to them for long enough, you suddenly realise, ooh, this is special. And many of the people who work with me for, even we've got 70 people who've worked with me for longer than 20 years already. And, you know, there's not one of them I would welcome in the house.
So people you've slightly taken a punt on, it's been good. It comes down to a sort of human instinct.
Every time I've taken an instinct that is distinct to the CV-based thing, every time I've spent a day plus, which we now do for senior jobs, I insist on 2 days. I want the people that we're going to employ to not only talk with me and go out for a drink with me, I want to talk to the people that they are going to be in charge of. And the final decision, and I don't think this is mad, is made by the people that they're going to be the boss of.
Yeah.
Because actually, if you go into a job knowing that the people that are under you chose you, you will feel a sense of duty to them to do the right thing. It becomes reciprocal. But as I say, I've made 2 particularly bad decisions in my life, and
Based on the CV and
based on being over-impressed by the CV and not scraping the surface. Because a lot of people, when you look at a CV, have done what looks like important things. They've been at big companies, very successful companies, and what you should have done is take up the references in such a way. Did the company do its best work while this person was there? Or was he actually still surfing the success of the person before? You get an awful lot of that, you know. So
it's a bit like star casting. When I have spent a lot of my life on this side of an audition table, and when a producer asks you to cast a star, or a project comes to you with someone on board because they're famous and they're going to sell the tickets, I have never done a show with a star in it where the star hasn't been the worst person in the show, because they're just there on paper, and they don't care about the other actors. They're always massively insecure about why they're there. One star I worked with wouldn't even have notes, because after every preview show you have company notes, and he wouldn't have his notes with the rest of the company, so he didn't want the others to hear anything I might say about, I couldn't hear you on that line, or you stood by the pillar, so I had to go and give him his notes in the dressing room. So that's where, just if you just look at what people have done on their CV, you're just off to a terrible start. And I always have this, it's a little bit difficult to quantify, but I have a very strict no wanker policy, because I don't care how brilliant somebody might be in the role if they're going to be a pain in the arse in rehearsal and not work with the other actors. Having done a lot of touring early in my career, I made quite a quick judgment about people based on the could I bear to be in a train carriage going across the Soviet Union like for 16 hours, which I had to do very early.
That's
You
quite
kind of
extreme.
know, don't you? I can't bear to be on a train carriage with this person for an hour, and I'm not going to want to take risks in a rehearsal.
So how am I doing? When will I know?
When you get to Vladivostok.
Actually, it would be great if you could get everybody, if I could get every actor that I've sort of on the shortlist to actually come into a rehearsal. That's when you find out that they're really, because they're big actors, they can always talk the talk and act the part of somebody who's going to be a really good company member. So you have to turn your instincts on. Very it's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. How did we get onto this subject? Amazing. It's like,
We were talking about taking risks.
oh, that's how we got there. Yeah. No, I was just wondering how we got onto doing interview techniques. Yeah. We'll get onto my favourite form of spaghetti then.
We always thought heroes. Who would you have at a dinner party of dead people? If you could resurrect 5.
Could that be dead yet? Could I just make it happen?
You can't be, but in a fancy dinner party scenario, you could have like 3 or 4 people.
Brunel.
Name.
I'm loving that. Like, Isengard Kingdom Brunel, just for the name. I mean, just imagine, he's already #1 in the hit parade, and then he goes and designs things as well. You know, how good is that?
Yeah.
I think Brunel is amazing because he just did stuff. Yeah, I'm a big fan of a lot of those people in the Industrial Revolution. I mean, you know, that guy with the whip building the pyramids. He was good. I mean, a bit bad on social conscience, but what a result! I mean, let's be honest. Kind of a result. Yeah, but there are things like that, which I'll just sorry. Like the guy who discovered longitude. You know.
Harrison. I didn't discuss it. Yeah.
Did you?
Did.
Yorkshire man.
Everything I know about anything is always related to play. And the play about John Harrison, it had the board of longitude. You kept meeting, and people were. There were all sorts of bonkers ideas about how to solve the problem of longitude. Somebody said, if you, it's awful, the wounded dog theory. If you wound a dog and then take it out to sea, you tell how far you've gone by the state of the festering of the dog's wound. But there were all sorts of mad ideas, and Harrison kept going back, and there was a big class thing. They were all very upper class.
You know what? I've just decided to uninvite him. Oh, yeah. I see. Okay.
You go into the
He's back.
Right, yeah, you should be very much on this. It was the board was Neville Masculine and these very upper class people who thought he was rather commons and bell ringer thing, except that she was, but he had got the answer. And the way I staged it was the company were drowned sailors, and at the beginning of the show they climbed onto the set, which was a ship, and sang sea shanties and then played the spirits of all the dead sailors
God.
who, because the ships didn't know where they were before Harrison's work, so they just, and if it was, you could just about tell if you could see the moon that they was the moon. So again,
But seriously, the reason I would be interested in that is because probably none of you know this about me. I own the Shipwreck Museum in Charlestown, in Cornwall, because my hobby is wreck diving, and the guy who owned the museum developed a terminal illness, and I didn't want to see it become a developer's thing, so I bought it. And the amount of wrecks that were caused by people being in the wrong place. I mean, in the early 1700s, half the British Navy was sunk on the Isles of Scilly because it thought it was 100 miles distant and it was off.
so the numbers were terrifying.
Absolutely.
Throughout the day, we'd have people coming on and doing this news announcements of this ship's gone down, this many people, this ship, and this ship, and this ship. And we were just sending ships out, and they were just sinking all the time and losing hundreds of lives.
Regeneration.
So we got 2 dinner guests. Yes, I have. But we got
2 dinner guests. We've got Brunel and Harrison.
yeah, a bit
And the bloke
male heavy, isn't it? It's a bit male heavy. I think Mae West.
Very
Yeah.
We'll have Mae West.
Wasn't she? Didn't she say old age is no place for sissies? That was-
I think that's. And there are so many. She, like Winston Churchill, is one of the people that every year since she died, she's given more quotes.
Yes. Why Mae West?
just because I think a good party needs to have a bit of frivolity in it.
Yeah.
To have a bunch of blokes drinking too much wine followed by brandy telling you how important they are is my idea of dullness. So we'll have Mae West. Who should we have that is utterly trivial and just generally Joan Rivers.
Oh yeah.
Joan Rivers, I mean, she would be marvellous, and because we'd laugh a lot. And I think, actually, of all the things in life that are the most life-affirming, it is laughter. I can go lots of places and people would be wise, but actually making me laugh so that it hurts, I'll pay good money for that. So we'll have Joan Rivers, Mae West.
Ian Harrison, obviously got Kingdom now.
Tell you what, there'll be nobody else on this planet with those 4 guests.
Yeah, that's right. So any questions before we finish? Yes.
Something to drag you right back to the beginning. You told 2 great stories about Nantes and Poland. Hilligan and Eden have been a long time in that part of Cornwall, which is also derelict. What's the regeneration around that part of Cornwall? Now, I know all about the coastal pretty bits.
Pretty good, because what happens is you get a kind of, I think I may have said yesterday, it is like exorcism. But what happens in a geography is that, this is going to sound awful, but it's true. What happens is people who are losers, living in an area that is losing, use the fact as excuse for them being losers, that the whole place is haunted. So what you need to do is to create some signs of good fortune so that that can no longer be an excuse. So then what happens is loads of people then create the so-called Eden effect is only down to the fact that we lifted the pool of expectation, and lots of smart people have done all sorts of other things. I mean, you know, the university, Falmouth became a university, and now more people do start-up companies in Cornwall coming out of Falmouth that are still successful after 3 years than any other part of Britain. And the internet has really helped. So lots of young people now, and the tester, you know, this area had it, but in Cornwall, it has had it, not had it, hadn't had it. It is the marker of a place that has got life in it is when people come there to make a career and a life, not to end it. And Cornwall before us was a place where predominantly the feeling was people could retire there and all the rest of it. Because now it's absolutely, yeah. And if you look at, say, places like Newquay, when I moved to Cornwall in 1987, Newquay was rough as rats. It had decent looking property looking out over the best beaches you could imagine, but it was really rough. There were lots of people from the north who had the only happiness they'd ever remembered was being on a holiday in Cornwall. They came to just, you know, be there, be on the dole and do what they did. Now, there's film companies moving to Newquay. It's surf capital. The World Surf Championships are run from there, and it's really weird. The moment people think of it being successful, it becomes successful. This is the point you were making about everybody in this room's got dreams, and actually the dream you have is fueled by that success. So thank you for the question.
Here.
On that note, how do you, once you've gone in and you've regenerated, and artists are brilliant at doing that, they've done it across globally, they move into areas, low rents, they regenerate, they get the attraction. How do you afford to keep them there though? This is the thing. Once you get that regeneration, a lot of those areas are forced out, the very seeds of which have been sown to make that. So can you give me any examples of where that has been enabled to keep that lifeblood within it?
Regeneration.
Because actors, can they afford to live in London? It's very difficult, isn't it?
Very,
And in areas where they have regenerated, then they've had to move to, well, what's the next place that's going to be regenerated? So I'm thinking about that lifeblood of keeping some of that in there. What would you...
Well, I'm very political. I insist that our local sourcing is pretty draconian. I mean, we will buy local under all circumstances except for your incompetence. That if the reason for your product being more expensive than I can get everywhere else, if it's down to the geography, I'll still buy it from you. If it's down to you just being rubbish at the job, I won't. I'm very unromantic about the notion of Cornwall. Deliberately, of course it's romantic and I love it, but there is this kind of, oh, it's Cornish, it's amazing. No, it isn't. To be amazing is an objective thing. don't patronise Cornwall by saying it's amazing because it's in Cornwall. It's
Yeah,
actually,
you're unsentimental.
yeah, that's the word I attribute. Yeah. So the other thing, pay people better.
Yes.
It's a revolutionary concept. The problem, though, with paying people better, if I'm just, very much friends here, if you took Eden or my husband's Elegant, if the majority of people that you employ are visitor facing and you're paying, I don't know, £11 an hour or whatever, £12 an hour, right? To increase the salaries of those who are at the bottom, who are the huge number, the weirdest thing, and Eden's an even better example, you've got 450 staff. If you add 50p an hour, right, to the people in the bottom area, that comes about £500,000 a year, just like that, bang. And it's really difficult how to do that without actually explosively being commercial. And it's one of the problems that charities have, is how do you develop a good idea, like you, but then also say, how can we be entrepreneurial to create money in other businesses that are associated with us so that we can pay people even better? Because it feels really weird to be paying people the money. I mean, my children work for me as well. And you get over the dinner table, this thing about how can you pay people knowingly less than you know they need to live on? And many of us do that in certain circumstances. I mean, if you're a tech, you don't, because you're just trying to get people in. And that's the biggest battleground, I think, is the pay one. And you go above the living wage, but then going much above the living wage, you've got to have a revolution in terms of your commercial model. And that is just tricky.
But isn't some of that about this not going into the future with a rigid structure forever? That it's about constantly re-looking at what can we afford now, what can you afford now,
Yeah.
and reassessing it all the time. And saying everyone's going to have to take a pay cut this year because of this, if it ever going to pay rise next year, I'm not going to set I mean, maybe strategy is an enemy.
But what happens if I hate people? No, I don't hate people, but I want to give you an example. Let's pretend I'm running Eden as a business. Yeah? Guys, look, I've been approached by this company, and they can do all of my visitor-facing stuff with robots. All of it. My food prep, I can do all of it with robots. If we don't have cash, so we only do plastic, we don't even have to have cash handling people. We don't need so many accountants. I mean, we can take 250 people out of our beta. What do you reckon, guys? I mean, what do you reckon? And you know what is really interesting is how everybody else has got a view about your morality. They all want you to do the right thing, which they wouldn't do.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's amazing. The council will say to you, "Oh, we really want you to employ as many people as possible." There's a recession. You say, "Can you give us a grant or a help with this?" I'm really sorry, that's not our job. Thank you.
Because
No, but
everyone's been to school, everyone thinks they can be a teacher, because everyone's been to the theatre, they think direct play. And everyone can run the youth project.
well, to be honest, I eat food and I thought I could be a chef. It's a disaster. No, everybody can't run the project, but actually the truth is, in hard business terms, those jobs do not exist unless it's well run. And in order to be profitable, it needs to attract people to come to it, and people need to believe in the mission of it. The truth is, they won't come if they only believe in the mission of it, because you're going to bore them to death, and they won't come unless you're entertaining. So you need to do the two things together, and to do that together, you need good people. And so it is a...
And people like people, don't they, really? Most people don't want to be in a room with robots.
Have you ever been to Leeds United?
But on that note, thank you all.
I didn't mean that in a unit.
So if you've got an idea which is mad or controversial, and you've spent a lot of time working on that idea, when do you know when to give up?
This is about killing your darlings, isn't it? I think...
But this idea is very, very well progressed. We just need somebody or something that last bit of money.
If you're talking about money, that's one thing. If you're talking about an idea, I've got a very good friend who is a member of one of the richest families in the world, and he's a really good friend. What he was saying to me is, I've been trying to do this insect theme park for years and years and years, and his wife was just really right, but he's 25 years I've been trying to get this together. And none of the family had the bravery to talk frankly to him. And I took him out for a beer and I said, "You're going to hate me. You're never going to want to see me again. It's a shit idea. It's a really shit idea. And you know, you are married into the Rockefeller family. Like you're married in, and they haven't found you the money.
Yeah.
Okay. If this not telling you something, you know." Anyway, he got a bit weepy, and anyway, he gave it up. And then he used his script, and I gave it to mate because at Disney, and it became the script for a film called Ants. So, all's well that ends well. You've got to be brave. If you've got an idea and no one is backing it, you've got to understand that a great idea is either such genius that it is ahead of its time, that you've got to bank on it, or it could be really crap and you've become addicted to it. And with each passing month that you're working on it, you've given it more value because of your emotional buy-in to the amount of time you've given to it. And that was the case with my friend Paul. All I can say is the things I have been involved in, it's like a hit record. You know, I was in the music industry for 10 years. You know, inside 5 minutes, whether a story, play, a film, short script, or whatever, or a song, those chords fit. They fit. Any song I've ever seen anyone work on that took a week to write. I'm not talking about the whole lyric. I'm talking about the chords fitting. Never hits. Never hits. I mean, and most songwriters I know will tell you the same. Almost every song they've written that was a hit, the first chords just fell to the hand or whatever. So my advice to you, if you're very close to having the last bit of money, it means that you've either been so charming you've persuaded an awful lot of charitable people to give you money, or you're so talented, a whole bunch of people have got there, and you just need to meet a few others. And now you've got to look in the mirror.
I'd rather think it was a second.
Of course, and all of us do too. I'm being a little bit jokey because it's really hard dealing with someone's dreams, and it's also very hard killing your darlings, as we all know. But it may be that either you need to sell your soul or sell one of your body parts to get the rest of the money,
Maybe get raising us.
or you need to just look in the mirror and kill it. Because it may well have put a break on most of your life.
Yeah, and other opportunities might come.
Yeah.
You don't know what will happen if you go, okay, actually, I'm just going to take that leap of faith and say, I've learned so much from this, I'm now equipped to move on and do something else. But you don't know until you try.
And my mate Paul, he is so happy now. He's so happy he's not trying to build an ant. You know, that's a different play. Anyway.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.